Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today's episode 107. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. I am the founder and CEO of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, a digital marketing agency for the immigration industry, and which brings you this show. Today, we're talking to a really interesting startup founder who is disrupting the O-1 visa space using tech, using artificial intelligence, working with attorneys. Really excited for it. The O-1 visa, of course, extraordinary ability visa, is really popular. Sure, it's often understood as like people call it the Einstein visa or whatnot. And it's used for everybody from creatives to really accomplished engineers and so many people. And it's become more popular even in the recent few years as the H-1B visa has kind of become even more challenging. So it's really awesome to see companies kind of coming in and disrupting the space. So our guest today is the CEO and founder of a company called Plymouth, Lisa Wehden, who hails from the UK and is now based in California. And so I'm really excited to chat with her and learn all about kind of what she's done with Plymouth and how the company came about, and maybe, her views on immigration and how technology plays a role. So before we get started, I do want to say thank you to our main sponsor of the episode, Lex Reception. For those of you who practice immigration law, and if you've never heard of Lex Reception, they're basically a legal reception service, an intake service, and a client support service. So they answer phone calls and messages in real time. They schedule appointments. They answer emails. They are basically your receptionist. They can also reach out proactively if someone fills out a form on your website or otherwise reaches out to you. So, you never have to sort of miss a prospect, reaching out to your firm. And if it's the weekend or evening or something like that, and you don't get back to them right away, you could miss them if they go somewhere else. With Lex Reception, they reach back out and schedule something with those folks right away, 24/7. They also integrate with a number of platforms that immigration lawyers use: Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and others. And if you are listening to this podcast, which you are because you're hearing this ad, you get $250 off your first month of service with them. So use the link in the show notes, or just reach out to them at lexreception.com. And, when you chat with someone, tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So thank you, Lex Reception. But more importantly, thank you, Lisa, for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation. And good morning, because you're in California.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Laborless is, it's a niche product, right? We focus on the H-1B visa, and we do kind of compliance automation there. I love meeting folks that are building platforms, at the very least, that are starting with, a particular visa category or solving a specific issue. I think when you're outside of the immigration industry, you look at immigration as, oh, it's tiny, right? Legal is so big, so immigration law is so tiny. So there must be, only just general tools. But then you get into it and you realize immigration is so complex, and every visa category is like its own universe. So, it's really cool to see kind of what you're working on. But before we get into like the whole O-1, automation stuff, obviously I love to kind of learn about the guest and their background and sort of, what their experience is with immigration at all. You obviously were born in the UK, right? And were raised there. So before you even came here, what was it like kind of growing up? Were you raised in London or elsewhere?
I grew up in a village in the north of England. So we had, I think, like 500 people living in this village.
Wow.
My mum was actually an immigrant to the UK. She's from Algeria originally, and she left actually during a civil war, and moved to the UK. And so she was a complete foreigner to the UK, and we were brought up actually with quite an immigrant mindset. We'd arrived in the UK. It wasn't my mum's cultural home, and there was this real focus on education. So in the north of England, it's the industrial heartland of England. It's not as, diverse as London. And it was a pretty unique experience growing up in a village. Everyone had close community ties. lots of incredible nature. And yeah, I look back on it quite fondly because it was a very peaceful time. Yeah, we had one bus that would come every hour to take us to the local town. So it was very different from this hyper-connected world that I live in today. And it was kind of a much simpler time in lots of ways. I could read, I could focus on my studies, and there was not really much else to do in that place. And then when I got to university, actually, it was hilarious. There was a supermarket you could go to until 10 o'clock at night. And I remember arriving at 18 years old, shocked that a supermarket was open until 10 o'clock at night. My whole world just opened. And yeah, it's funny, now I live in California, which is this, epic state. I never thought when I was growing up in the north of England as this child of Algerian immigrants that I would be here. Working in immigration. But now looking back, kind of that migrant journey has been a theme throughout my whole life. And Plymouth really is, represents a lot of threads in my life that it wasn't super clear in, when things were happening. But in hindsight, the clarity came.
I love that. How long did you live you lived in the village until university, right?
Until I was 18, I know. My mom is a really special, I love my mom. We had some stints, like we lived in the Caribbean for a year, which was really cool. She was very, she likes to give us lots of unique experiences. We traveled a lot as children. And yeah, there were some stints elsewhere, but predominantly until I was 18, I was in the village.
So out of curiosity, did you feel like an outsider, as a kid? Kind of, obviously, you were born there, right? Although your mother immigrated, you were born in the UK, in the village.
Yeah, I was born in England. But there was something, I didn't. Yeah, I felt, I do feel British, but I feel also, Algerian with my mother. So yeah, there was something about feeling a bit like an outsider growing up, like not fully part of that ecosystem.
Definitely. Yeah. I was curious if, like, in the area, I mean, your school must have been very small. I'm sure everybody knew your background and everyone else's background. Like, were kids nice about it? Did they make you ever feel like an outsider? Because and I'm reflecting. I was born in Ukraine, but we moved to the U.S. when I was 2. So for all intents and purposes, my entire life that I can remember really actively was here. But I went to school in Queens. I mean, if you were in my class and you were in America for more than 2 generations, you're the outsider, because everyone else was like either immigrants or second generation. Their parents were immigrants, and so yeah. But that's how the culture is here. So I was, were kids nice about that, or did they just not care? Because you're born here, you speak English.
We call it primary school. So when you're like 4 to 11,
right.
Just a really special time. No one's thinking about, background or color of skin. Like, it was very welcoming. Like, everyone was friends. When I got a little bit older, I did feel more different. Definitely at high school, I felt that, I looked a little bit different. But largely, it was inclusive, but there were moments when I felt more of an outsider than not. But I'm grateful for my childhood. It was really funny because in the north there's a very thick Yorkshire accent. So if anyone's watched Game of Thrones, Jon Snow has this very thick Yorkshire accent. My parents didn't have the Yorkshire accent, so I was never brought up with a Yorkshire accent. And so that was actually a really funny time at school where I had someone say to me that I talked really funny because I didn't talk with a Yorkshire accent, and I felt so embarrassed. And I tried to adopt one, but it just didn't work. So it was that was an unusual time.
That's so funny. That's like being from New York and then someone doesn't sound like they're getting coffee or whatever, and then you make fun of them for not saying coffee that way. That's funny. Yeah, kids will say the darndest things. That's super interesting. Did you, by the way, did you speak Arabic at home? Like, did you learn that growing up because, you know, with family?
My mum spoke French and
Yeah,
Arabic.
French and Arabic.
Her first, she's more confident in French, but there's a fusion. I actually didn't get to, I'm one out of five, and I was the fourth child. And my brother had speaking difficulties, and he didn't get taught French, so I didn't get taught French, but both my sisters speak French. So it's like this frustrating part of it. I wish I could speak French, and I'm okay at it. I'm just not perfect at it.
Gotcha. So they're not talking smack about you in front of you because you still understand them.
Yeah, I understand them, but I can't, I
Right.
don't have like the best responses.
Right. That's so great. That's awesome. And so then you went to, I guess, I mean, I don't know what this would be like in a village, but I guess it doesn't matter. I like to ask guests this question. Did you ever consider yourself sort of entrepreneurial when you were younger? You know, like I would say paper routes or lemonade stands. Again, I don't know how I spent a lot of time in rural New York, and our town probably has more than 500 people. There's no lemonade stand because the next house you have to drive to, right? And so you wouldn't, and they're hidden in the woods. So, but was there any inclination of, you know, starting something, a club, anything like that, you know, for when you were younger, or were you kind of just down in the book studying, you know, school kind of usual stuff?
I actually threw parties when I was 16. And so we would rent out a local club. It would be a non-alcoholic night. And that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. It was like, you know, how do we have cool community events when you're 16 and you want to, you know, dance with your friends and you want to go and, you know, meet boys, and we rented out local nightclubs and, you know, have a non-alcoholic night and sold tickets for that and raised sponsorship. Wow. So that was my first entrepreneurial journey. I didn't I guess think about it as entrepreneurship now, but it was some form of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, totally. I think that, you know, I reflect on that a lot. And that's why I like to ask that question. I 100% did not have the confidence, not even close, to try to do something like that when I was younger, even in high school, you know, even in college. I had ideas in college, but I never like felt that I could be the one to initiate whatever it is, an event, an organization, a business. That really kind of started for me in law school. And I started a student club with some friends. And the student club still exists today. It's the longest running thing I've ever made. But I reflected on that later, and I thought that was the first entrepreneurial sort of endeavor that I undertook in law school, because for some reason I sort of built up the confidence for that. And that's why I love asking the question. You know, I don't think that, you know, I'm any different if I had done this when I was 5 and did a paper route, or like sold baseball cards, you know, lemonade stands. There's kids who they just do that. It's natural for them. And I'm always curious to see some folks did that. And then some folks are like, I never started or had any intention of starting a business until the business that I'm running today, right? That they're on the show for. But yeah, I think throwing a party, because it's marketing, it's coming up with the idea, right? It's executing in operations. You have to call the place, schedule things, coordinate non-alcoholic beverages, you know, maybe snacks, whatever it is. Right. And then market it and get sponsorships. I mean, that is a business. It's confined, but it's a business. So how were they, by the way? Were they a lot of fun?
So much fun. Yeah. It's, and to kind of like that idea, it's like, I think a lot about what gives people agency. You know, when you're little, where do you get your sense of agency from? You know, when you are allowed to, you know, succeed at something, like you do like a tiny version of this. Maybe it's like you experiment with selling sweets and then all of a sudden that's successful. So you do the next step and the next step. Or you feel like an urge to solve a problem. You know, one of the problems I saw is like, oh, like we don't have like community spaces where we can hang out outside of school, where we can dance, and it's like a social setting, you know. And I saw my sisters going to nightclubs and I was really jealous of them going to nightclubs. And I was like, I want to create that. Like that's something I want to see in the world. And in doing that, you know, going through those, you know, buying non-alcoholic beverages, like speaking to the venue, you get this like sense of confidence because you're building competence, I guess. So it's like your confidence comes from doing something that you're succeeding at, and you keep on building up this sense of ability in yourself. And then, you know, once you do one version of it, you're like, should we try and do something bigger, or should I try and do something different? And I have this real belief that everyone has this in them. Like, I think everyone could build something. They might not want to build a company. They could build a project or a community event. And I just think finding the thing that you want to build in the world is the hard challenge. You know, like what problem do you want to solve? But yeah, I'm asked a lot about entrepreneurship, and I'm like, I think everyone is an entrepreneur. It's just where they direct their energy.
Yeah, definitely. And being in that, with that mindset, you can do it, like you said, within the confines of somebody else's direction. So, you know, because, and I don't want to, we can go off probably on this topic for another 45 minutes, but I think about this a lot. I do believe that there are people who are who more intuitively like create entire concepts, whether it's a project or a business or an event, right? And then there are other people who genuinely love to execute on someone else's vision. But to your point, they feel that that's their skill, and that's the thing that they excel at the most, the details, you know. So they're not coming up with the concepts, they're not ideating, they're implementing, right? They're actually putting things into action. And we need both. Like, everyone can't walk around throwing ideas around and then no one's building anything. We can't just have kind of entrepreneurial founder types. But you're right, because it gives me agency, but then I want somebody else to execute on some of those things, and that gives that person agency, and it works really, really nicely together. Because I used to think sort of everyone should be a business owner. They just haven't found their niche. But then I realized, especially now that I have some, you know, wonderful people that work with me, I'm like, I wouldn't be able to do this without them. Yeah. And the fact that they love doing this thing, like, I'll give them some direction and they go forward and do it. They love that. I love giving the direction. We work so well together, and it has to be this way, because otherwise they don't have work and I don't have a business. But yeah, I love this discussion in particular because I think a lot about, like, it goes into like, what do you want to do with your life, where do you get happiness, et cetera, et cetera. But okay, so awesome. You did your you broke through your entrepreneurial, you know, I don't know, ceiling, if you will, and got started with parties. So then you went to university down, I guess, closer. Where'd you go to school? You were in Cambridge, I think.
I was at Oxford, the other place.
Sorry, the other place. Sorry. Apologies.
It was funny. I chose Oxford over Cambridge because my grandma didn't know of Cambridge, which is hilarious.
Okay.
It was like, Oxford is the one that my international grandma will know.
Got it. You have to keep grandma happy in terms of school. That's for sure. She has to be proud of you. So how did you feel going into it? Did you have any sense of what you wanted to do, or were you kind of like, you know, need to continue education, obviously, so let me attend university and see what happens?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be an academic. So I loved reading. I loved books. I loved essays. Like, I just got so much energy from studying history and economics. Like, those were my passions. I loved narratives around people, movements, you know, something starting really small and growing and changing the world. I became really interested in two periods of history. One was Maoist China, because China has been coming on the global stage for the past 2 decades, if not longer. And I was like fascinated by this place and time that I just had no context on. You know, a child growing up in rural Yorkshire, not knowing about this epic superpower that was developing. And so I really was fascinated by that. And I also had this I bought this book for Christmas called Wild Swans, which charts the story of China through 3 women. And I just found that so interesting. The second period I was really excited by was 20th century Europe, and, you know, the 2 world wars, just a complete change, you know, the clash between communism and democracy, fascism, like these big ways in which we structured society were coming into conflict throughout this 100-year period that's completely transformed the world. And how we have ended up with a system of liberal democracy in the West is, you know, not through not a lot of battles through ideologies. And so I think sometimes we live in a period where we don't fully realize how recent the way we've structured society has become. And so for me, just like as a student studying these narratives, I just got so energized. I was like, wow, I feel like I understand the world so much better through studying history and also economics, you know, how people trade and, you know, how we interact as a society. And so I got to university and I was like, okay, I'm at like one of the top schools in Europe. How do I become an academic and, you know, live in my world of ideas? And yeah, after 4 years at Oxford, it kind of beat it out of me. I was like, I don't know if I want to be an academic anymore.
Yeah, I can understand that. And so, but you graduated with a degree. Did you do, was it like a history and economics dual? Or
the UK is less, well, Oxford is less fluid than the US, where you can go and change your degree. So I went in studying history and I tried to take as many econ history classes, but it was just pure history.
You know, it's funny. I came into university studying financial economics, and you know, econ 101 is like supply demand curves, and you know, just the kind of what's his first name? Maynard Keynes. I forget. But you know, all of this stuff. Adam Smith. I mean, you learn all this stuff, but then you don't get any context. And then I ended up staying in college for 5 years and did a victory lap and got a second major in philosophy, politics, and law. Not quite history, but it was like you know, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century economics was actually philosophy rather, was actually the economists back in the day writing out their theories on paper. And we were studying history. And it's so cool that you did this, because if I could go back in time and attend university again, I would actually want to take the history part first and learn about, a little bit different from what you did, but learn about what these people were thinking, and then go on to the economics part and then put, you know, kind of superimpose formulas and, you know, numbers onto their ideas. So it's really smart that that Oxford did that. So I can imagine being really excited by it. But I'll never forget this. It was, I graduated, I was class of 2009, so I graduated 2010, and the financial crisis hit, you know, in 2007, 2008. And I remember I was taking a graduate level econ class, and, you know, we're reading the news, and it's like people are losing their jobs, and it's all this horrible stuff. The mortgage crisis is happening. People are losing their homes. I mean, God forbid, some folks are like jumping out of windows, like whatever. It's terrible. And my professor was like, this is so exciting. He's like, I went to school to witness things like this. I'm not going anywhere. My job's not going anywhere. If anything, I have new data to work with. And I remember thinking, like, something about this feels really perverse. Like, I feel like my instinct was to see these issues happening around the world and try to solve them. His instinct was just, I'm totally disconnected from these issues. They say economists are a lot of fun at parties. He's like, I'm totally disconnected from these issues. I just can't wait to look at them with zero emotional, you know, connection and just study them because this is my work as an economist. That was a moment for me where I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do the master's in econ. Maybe I should do like something more practical and whatever. I went to law school, but the story made me reflect on the sort of, if your instinct is to do something practical in the world, to create something in the world, and then you put yourself in an environment where your ideas actually never become anything. They're just ideas. You're an academic. You're trade in ideas, you trade in arguments, but you never actually put pen to paper in a way. I can imagine how that could be tiring, and you would just feel like, okay, I want to go do something now, like do something in the world. Because you actually ended up going eventually into investor kind of work, right? Like, which is the total opposite of being a philosopher. This is like, let me fund a lot of different people and see what they do in the world, right? Let's see what so how did you make that transition from, you know, just being sort of an academic or thinking about academia into seemingly the total opposite, which is, you know, let's build companies as quickly and at as high volume as possible?
Yeah, so many thoughts about your professor, just like, you know, watching the financial crash and being like, this is great content. Like,
right. Yeah, exactly.
And also, you know, it's just really interesting to think about how you build a map of the world. You know, like maybe you start with history and then you layer on economics because you want to get this framework. I think a lot about how do you gain visibility around what is the state of affairs, like how do you build your own world map in some ways. And I think the sequence in which you learn information is really important. You know, you learn history and then economics and then you learn immigration. Like, you know, what map do you view of the world and how it all interacts? So it's really cool to hear your own journey, because I think it just helps you understand how someone conceives of, you know, interactions and what's important and what's not important. So actually, when I graduated, I started a company. So I don't think it's on my LinkedIn, which I should update it. But I left university and my friend was super influential. He's actually an entrepreneur in India now. He was like, Lisa, don't go into like law or banking. There's this industry called the technology industry. And we'd also been part of a student club where we met a lot of technologists as well. And, you know, it was 2016 in Oxford. So technology was not huge. Like everyone was going into more traditional careers. And he was like, Lisa, this is the future. Like, you know, get involved. So I started a company straight out of graduation, and I could go into this company. I ended up, so when I moved to London from Oxford, I had this problem of buying art for my apartment. It was like super expensive. I couldn't find anything, you know, I wasn't wealthy, so I like didn't have like so much money to spend. I was like, why can't I find art online, like to make my space like a little bit more beautiful? And I ended up building this marketplace, this digital marketplace for buying and selling art. I ran around all the art schools in London and met with emerging artists and did profiles of them. I hosted events in pop-ups in Airbnbs. So we transformed Airbnbs into these really cool like galleries, but it was very intimate. There was DJs. It was like this like hip kind of London vibe. And I wanted it to be the next Airbnb. I was like, this is going to be the next, you know, mega consumer platform where people could find and discover art. I actually flew out to San Francisco multiple times to meet people. I had a co-founder, and it's just a very hard business to run. Like it's my first real entrepreneurial endeavor. But it was amazing. We built a community of 200 artists. We sold art on the platform. And I came, one of the hardest things was actually getting a visa to the US because we wanted to spend more time in America. And after about a year of doing that, I was really burnt out. Like we hadn't raised any money. I was living off savings. I had a part-time job as well because I wanted to fund this platform. And yeah, I ended up stopping the business because I didn't have any resources to continue. But I still love the idea. Like, I'm like, I think the idea was actually very good.
That's amazing. The fact that you had the courage, you know, and sort of drive to do that right out of university is fantastic. And also, I mean, you know, for me, I always think about if you do something like this and then it fails, you're learning so much along the way. I mean, even the sort of the soft kind of skills, you know, flying to California, going through the emotions of meeting with whoever they were, investors, partners, you know, artists, et cetera, putting on ideas or putting on events to build community, which you already had experience from high school doing, right? Like yeah. These things actually do build on top of each other. So you should definitely add that to your LinkedIn profile. I mean, that would be, not that you're looking for a job, but you know, it's still, I think that's really awesome. So when you eventually, I guess you shut that down, or at least let's say you paused it. Let's put it that way. How did you, I guess at that point you were, I mean, your only sort of professional experience was entrepreneurship, right? It was being in the startup world. And even if you hadn't raised money, I'm sure you did a lot of research about what it takes to raise venture funding, what the venture, you know, industry looks like. Is that sort of how you eventually moved into the startup space as an employee, you know, rather than a founder?
Yeah, I had this amazing mentor. He's a guy called Charlie Songhurst. He's this like prolific angel investor. And I reached out to him to ask him for advice. I was like, look, I feel like I failed, you know, I didn't succeed at this company. And up until that point, I actually felt like I'd succeeded at many things in my life. Like, you know, I'd got good grades, like I'd got into a good school. And the fact that the company didn't work out, I felt, you know, pretty embarrassed. I was like, oh, this is like, wasn't super successful. And so I went to him and I was like, look, I want to make an impact. I really find this technology industry fascinating, but I don't think I'm ready to build another company yet. What I realized is that I need to learn from amazing people and watch how they do it. And then, you know, after a few years, I'd like to start something again. And we sat down for lunch and he said, like, look, there's this company in London that you should go and speak to. The two founders are two of the best founders I've ever met. And he'd met hundreds of founders at that point. They're called Matt Clifford and Alice Benting. They started this company called Entrepreneur First. And he said, you're going to be embedded in an ecosystem of entrepreneurs. You're going to learn a lot about AI, machine learning, emerging technologies. And after spending a couple of years at EF, perhaps you'll be ready to start your next company. And I was like, what's this company called Entrepreneur First? I hadn't heard of it. And EF basically is a place where people meet their co-founder and develop an idea. So it's basically the pre-YC. So instead of coming with a fully fleshed idea and team, you come as an individual. So you might say, look, I've got a PhD in computer science, and they will help you meet a co-founder, develop an idea, and fund your company. And I was like, wow, that sounds odd. And it also sounded like me when I was coming out of school. I was like, I wish I could have done this program. Like, it would have been useful for me. And ended up meeting Matt. We had this conversation. He's like him and Alice are just such talented individuals. And so I was desperate to get the job, and I did. Yeah, was really lucky to spend a couple of years there.
And that's really good advice too. And I imagine if you came, you know, if I was running that company and you came to me and said, I wish I had this when I was starting my last business, you would be the absolute best person to work with people who are coming in, because you can see the gaps between what they're doing today and what they could do on their own versus what, you know, this organization can sort of help them with. You know, that's really great advice. So it looks like you spent a few years there and sort of got into, you know, or I guess we're embedded with a bunch of tech startups and such. And this was all still, I am assuming, in the back of your mind, you're like, I'm still doing this to just take a break, learn a little bit, maybe save some money, and then I'll do something else in the future, right?
Yeah, I had this obsession to start another company. It was like really weird. Like, I was like, why did I want to start another company so badly? And I was like, basically building my confidence and conviction as I went. And part of the EF job, so after 3 months of being in London, my boss, Matt, said to me, like, hey, do you want to go and help set up the Berlin office? At that point, EF was expanding its model across Europe and Asia. And Berlin was our first European location. And so the Berlin site had to be really successful because that was our blueprint for expansion. I didn't think I was going to end up moving to Berlin. Like, that was not my intention. And I spent a month in Berlin, and the general manager of the Berlin office, Seffi, who is my friend who now works at Sequoia, he was like, come build with me here. It's going to be an entrepreneurial endeavor building this new office together. And I took the plunge. I was like, wow, this is kind of like entrepreneurship in a different form.
Yeah.
So my job was to run around Germany, meeting scientists, engineers, and convincing them to build companies, which was so odd. I think I was like 23 or 24 at the time, like just going to Munich, going to Potsdam, like all these places, like just I'd never been to before. And it was like the best 2 years, like just had such a blast. It was a very small, close-knit team in the EF Berlin office. We all became so close. But after 2 years of being in Berlin, I kept on looking at America, and I was like, oh, if I want to be in the technology industry, I have to be in America because I think it will enable me to be more ambitious. And so I did this analysis of all global cities where technology was becoming an industry or had become a major industry. So I looked at San Francisco, New York, London, looked at Berlin, looked at Paris, and I was like, which city would have the best place for me as a technologist? And San Francisco came out like at the top, unsurprisingly.
Right, of course. That's awesome. By the way, did you have to go through an immigration process going to Berlin? Because this was post-Brexit, right?
No.
Brexit was in 2016, and so
but it hadn't been implemented.
Oh, gotcha. It had like the rules hadn't changed yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't have to get some sort of an EU kind of work visa or anything like that. You were able to just go to Berlin and, as a English citizen, be able to work there.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there was no kind of crazy US immigration, like the US immigration journey I went on. I was like, whoa. But there was like some weird things. Like you had to go and register yourself in person. You had like this paperwork. You had to apply for an apartment in a very like bureaucratic way. It was like weird quirks of the German system, but otherwise actually very smooth.
Okay. Yeah. I would assume so, given that it was sort of coming, you were coming in as a UK passport holder. And I was curious because sometimes that initial sort of immigration process that a person goes through on their own, even if it's not a major challenge, it still sort of says, this was also kind of a broken process, like I wonder if there's something that can be done here. So before we move on, talking about immigration, I just want to say thank you to the second sponsor of this episode, which is DocketWise. So for folks who are listening, if you don't know DocketWise or haven't heard of them, DocketWise is an all-in-one immigration case management platform. They started really with forms. Actually, they started way back in the day they were called BorderWise, and they were a B2C platform. And then they changed to a B2B platform to sell to immigration lawyers. Started with forums, and now they have everything from customizable questionnaires to integrations with a ton of companies, including my startup, Laborless, which I really appreciate. They have great customer service. DocketWise also has a great blog and podcast, and they have a ton of content. They support this show. So for any immigration lawyers or folks working at immigration law firms, if you are in the market for an immigration case management system, or even if you're not, but you just want to see what else is out there, check out DocketWise. There's a link in the show notes, or, go to DocketWise.com and tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. So thank you to DocketWise. So now, Lisa, back to your journey. So you're in Berlin. You said no more. I know that you eventually then you worked in Bloomberg. It looks like, right, for a bit. You still did similar work, and this was in the U.S.
Yes,
in the U.S. So this job and this transition from Europe to the U.S. is the thing that actually got you acquainted with our immigration system here in the U.S. Right? Can you talk a little bit about that journey? Because, we don't need to go into the job at Bloomberg too much, but I have a strong suspicion that this experience of going through immigration was the thing that eventually made you say, okay, no, this is the thing that I'm going to do next. So what was that journey like, coming into the U.S. From an immigration standpoint?
It was crazy. I mean, yes, that's why I'm building Plymouth now. It's like 2.5 years of my life I'll never get back, maybe 3. So I got the job out of I guess effort and luck. I flew to San Francisco, spent a week cold calling, getting connections to people, and I met this really amazing partner called Roy. And I said, like, hey, I really want to move to the US. Like, here's what I've done, and would you be open to giving me a job? And he said, like, look, we can give you a job for an initial like year period, but we don't I like you. I think you're talented. Like, he was very supportive, but he was like, I don't really know anything about the immigration system. Like, we can use Bloomberg's resources, but it would be really great if you could figure out, what the best visa might be for you.
Wow.
So that started like this epic journey to figure out visas in America. And I was told by Bloomberg's immigration team, like, the H-1B is this lottery ticket system. If we put you in the lottery, you're going to be, I'd be literally waiting like maybe 9 to 12 months to get into America, because I was off cycle as well. So I had to wait this period of time, and there was no guarantee. And so I talked to a few friends, and they said, like, hey, have you thought about the J1 or the O-1 route? The O-1 was just like impossible. I was like, I don't have a, award, or like, I'm not I just didn't think it was even conceivable at that time. I actually like didn't even acknowledge it. I was like, no, the J1 seems like a much better route for me. The J1 was amazing because you get it so quickly. Like I got the J1 within 8 weeks. I think you could actually even get it faster. And I came in as a trainee. So I had the skills and experience from Entrepreneur First. I came in to learn American best practices in venture. And it gave me an initial 12-month period, but it would extend another 6 months. So I ended up like kind of co-writing my training plan. Like I proposed it, like doing all these things. And after I got into the US, I was like, I'm not going to think about immigration for like, 8 months. Like I don't need to think about this thing. After 8 months living in America, I was like, oh, like I actually really like it here. And so I had a conversation with my manager at the time and I said like, hey, what can we do to like plan out this immigration journey? And they were like, okay, well, like, what we do is the H-1B. And I was like, like the H-1B is this lottery ticket system. And if I don't get it, does that mean I have to leave the country? And they said, yeah, that's what's going to happen. And I was like, what? Like I've built some friends here. I have a great job. It's taken me a lot of effort to move my whole life from Germany to San Francisco. They're like, oh yeah, like that's the way the immigration system goes. And I was like, I don't want to have a lottery ticket of my life. Like that feels crazy. And I felt like I had skills to offer America. Like I wasn't trying to, not contribute my skills. And that started the O-1 journey for me. And I can kind of go into, what happened with my O-1 experience. But it was basically understanding the H-1B system that really got me seeking alternatives.
Yeah. I mean, and as somebody who I deal with the H-1B, not directly anymore, but sort of through my clients, the lottery is still a thing and it's still tough. And, I hope it changes one day, but I think for now, at the very least, this is where the O-1 comes in and other, there's an EB-2 and IW. I mean, there are a few other options that folks now are at least looking at pretty seriously. So what made you change your perspective? Because you dismissed the O-1 at first, and then, maybe it's just the only thing that sort of remained. And you said, okay, I need to make this work. How can we make this work? Or what was your thought process that went into you pursuing the O-1 sort of, first on your own, or I guess with Bloomberg?
Yeah, so it was really the community in San Francisco. So I ended up speaking to a lot of founders and people who had been, working in the technology industry, like professionals, who gave me the confidence to actually think that I was O-1 eligible. They said like, look, there's 3 criteria. This is maybe how you can meet them. So it wasn't talking to attorneys at that point. It was talking to my community. And Bloomberg, unsurprisingly, works with one of the biggest immigration firms in the world. And it was a really challenging experience for me to pitch my O-1 story to them. They were like, you don't have O-1 credentials. And I was like, no, I think I do. My friend, it's kind of weird to say, like, my friends told me I have O-1 credentials. Yeah. And they were like, no, we just don't think you meet the legal standard. And being, I think being like a high agency individual, I was like, no, I really think we can craft, like the O-1 is very exciting as a visa pathway because there's 2 elements to it. One is your ability to map your existing professional history to the criteria. The other component is if you're not eligible today, you can build your eligibility. You can spend 6 to 12 months working on memberships or judging opportunities to meet the legal criteria for an O-1 visa. So I couldn't really understand the attitude of saying like, no, you're not eligible, and then not giving me guidance on like how I could improve my eligibility. It felt more antagonistic than collaborative from a legal service provider standpoint. And I felt kind of confused by getting one information from people who'd received it and another information from the practitioner. So anyway, kind of forced the law firm to take on my case. Like Bloomberg supported me and they were like, look, pursue an O-1 for Lisa. I actually got rejected for the first O-1 that I applied for. And I think, I'm going to be honest here, I just don't think they put my story together really effectively. And in doing that, I ended up firing that law firm, which was pretty dramatic. And then working with a small practitioner to co-create the story, spent, I think, my summer writing up my O-1 application, because I'd seen how the original law firm had done it. And so I ended up writing my first draft, giving it to the practitioner and saying, like, this is how I think I would present my own story, and why I think I do have extraordinary ability in the field. And then they spent time reviewing what I'd prepared, putting it into a bit more of a clearer exhibit list memo style. And then I got approved. And I was like, wow, okay. After doing that, I was like, I never want to think about O-1 visas ever again.
Except
plot twist.
Right.
Yeah. And then basically what happened after that, you know, I spent 6 months like calming down from that very stressful period. And during that time, it was COVID as well. There was this global pandemic. It was very stressful. I was worried about if I left the US, I wouldn't be allowed back in. I hadn't seen my family for over a year at this point. So it was just like a lot of stuff coming together. But after that period had calmed down, I was like, something has to be fixed in this space. Like, more people need better education around this alternative pathway. More people need the ability to build their own case, you know. So during my O-1 process, I wrote an opinion piece for TechCrunch. I spoke at panels, like I did activities to improve my profile. I worked on a course with Stanford University on ethics and technology. So I ended up doing things that I would have done otherwise, but I did it as well with a mind around my visa as well. And in doing all of that, I basically said, like, more people need to know what they can do to boost their eligibility. So, you know, maybe a year before the H-1B lottery, someone on an F-1 visa might be able to prepare an O-1 application in advance to just give them more agency in their immigration process. I think sometimes the immigration system feels stacked against you as an individual. You can feel alone, frustrated, confused. You don't know the jargon. Like, it's just this hard process. And Plymouth actually started as an education project. Like, I just wanted to give people education around, you know, what are the criteria? What has historically been successful in applications? What can you do to improve your eligibility? And it was really through that education that I thought, you know, there's an opportunity to do something bigger here. And I wrote an essay about my journey. Lots of people reached out. Like, it was this like kind of beautiful, special community bottoms up initiative to give people more access to this visa pathway.
That's awesome. And, you know, I think the fact that you went through it and the fact that you saw, you know, you're somewhat making me think philosophically or I guess intellectually, you know, whether someone has extraordinary ability or not isn't dependent even necessarily on what they've judged or what they've written or where they've been featured. The ability is innate, or the ability is what you can and perhaps have done in the past. But these external manifestations of it are just a way for somebody to say, oh yeah, objectively, I believe you. Because if you tell me you're extraordinary, I'd be like, well, you know, because your mom told you you're extraordinary, so you think you're extraordinary, right? And you're like, no, wait, I really am extraordinary. Look at all of these lists of things. Yeah. And so, you know, I understand that viewpoint, which says, like, look, I know that I have, you know, this extraordinary ability. I just need to figure out ways to make it clear to other people. And that has to be an objective, you know, meaning, an objective way of doing that by judging something, writing an article, et cetera, et cetera. You started it as an educational sort of project. How did this turn into a business? Like, how did you go from that to, you know, we're going to support other O-1 seekers in figuring out whether they're eligible and then connecting them with an attorney or helping them file, you know, put together and eventually file their application?
Yeah, it was this really amazing, cool period of time where we were like, you know, I just was talking to dozens of people on a weekly basis around, you know, what they were thinking. I was like explaining my own journey. It was mostly just like me saying, like, hey, this is what happened for me. This is the ways in which you could think about your own, you know, maybe you want to join a membership for your software engineering community. Like, maybe you want to judge hackathons. Like there was ways to get creative. And after, I think I had like maybe over 200 conversations. This was during September to December. There was like a couple of moments where we ended up referring the people that we were working with to other providers. So I didn't have any intention to become a legal solution. I was like, oh, actually go work with this attorney and like go and, do your case with this provider. And then they would go and then they would come back to me and say, I'm having a terrible experience. They're not responding to me. I don't understand the timelines. They're not being very clear around, the expectations here. I had such an amazing conversation with you and you provided all these kind of tools to help me. And I think it's kind of a technologist lens. Like in technology, there is like this drive for really good customer experience. And the practitioners we were working with just didn't have the same desire to be fast, responsive, give software. Like, it wasn't the same culture to provide that level of service. And I think, I don't want to say anything bad about like they were doing great for like what they knew, but we were just trying to do something different.
Right.
And yeah, people would come back to us and say like, can you not just do our O-1 application? Like, I want to work with you. Like, you feel like you have a lot of empathy. You're fast, you're responsive. You feel like you figured it out. And what ended up happening actually is I reached out to dozens of attorneys on LinkedIn to try and find someone who would be willing to adopt kind of a more dynamic approach to O-1 case building, and ended up partnering with this amazing attorney who was like, I love what you're doing. I want to do this like amazing customer service experience. And so ended up becoming a really great relationship to provide just much better customer experience to this O-1 space.
And that person, is that firm somebody you're still working with today?
So actually it's Lorraine who's come on as our VP of legal now. And so we have a network of attorneys we work with. Lorraine is this pioneer in the O-1 space. She's actually extraordinary. Spent 15 years building O-1s for founders, engineers. And she was our network attorney. And now she's come on us as our VP of legal. And so we've had this really amazing 2-year relationship where we've been developing and thinking through how to disrupt this space. Like we were like, how do we change the image of the O-1? How do we change the quality of service? How do we build technology to make this process a lot easier? And I just have to give her a huge shout out because she's been an amazing inspiration for me as we build Plymouth together.
That's awesome. I love seeing immigration lawyers. I mean, really any lawyers, but in our industry that are, that they see the bigger picture and then they're willing to sidestep their traditional career and say, let's build something together to kind of make the industry better. It seems small on a daily basis, but we're going to look back on this. I mean, I guess you're looking back on it even now, 2 years in, and like these are the things that change the industry, meaningfully. For folks that are listening, whether they're immigration lawyers or maybe individuals, right, who are potentially interested in O-1 visa, what does Plymouth offer them today? Like why should they come to Plymouth? What does Plymouth do? What's the pitch, I guess?
Totally. We're an all-in-one technology platform for O-1 preparation. And so we provide software and tools to make your O-1 experience much faster and much higher quality than existing providers on the market. We're now 4x as fast as traditional law firm providers in preparing your O-1 case. We work with independent attorneys who will review and finalize all your legal arguments. Coming through Plymouth, you can get an amazing, quick experience with a quality legal provider who can finalize your case and submit. We work with over 135 technology companies, including Midjourney, Replit, Together AI, Pika AI, Runway ML. These are mega technology companies in our industry, and they've chosen to work with us for our speed and quality service. We take our craft exceptionally seriously. Coming from my immigrant background, every person that I work with, I'm dedicated to supporting them in their journey. And so we offer a lot of guidance and tools to help them understand what journey they're navigating. If they've got any questions, we help explain, what does the criteria mean? And we work with a lot of individuals who other providers said that they weren't eligible. And, our network of attorneys have a lot of creative strategies to help them meet their eligibility. So that is Plymouth today. Our vision is that we'll become an all-in-one immigration solution, but we're starting with the O-1 because we believe it's one of the most exciting pathways for technologists today.
One quick question for you: if a company is already working with the immigration counsel, obviously the O-1 is not the only thing that companies use, but it's something that they might use perhaps as a backup because it is a somewhat complicated, involved visa. Can they work with you even if they have other immigration counsel? Because I think that could be something. They might look at you and say, this sounds cool. We have an O-1, but we don't want to migrate our whole immigration program. We also have L-1s or whatever. I mean, depending on how big the company is. Have you had an experience of working with a client that may have other counsel that do all of their immigration for them, but they decided to go with you as sort of the experts, if you will, or something different or new for the O-1?
Absolutely. We come in as a specialist provider. We're focused on this very specific visa pathway. We're not doing thousands of H-1B applications. That's not our focus today. And so we really want to come in as partners, collaborators, and really help your top talent with this O-1 visa pathway. And so you can work with another provider. Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge endeavor to try and change, and we can't even offer that. So it's not either or.
Right.
We can be your specialist provider for your top talent.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think that's interesting because I'm trying to think of what questions folks might have that are, listening or watching. Obviously, if it's a startup and they have one visa, need and it's an O-1, this is easier. But if it's a mid-sized company that might say, hey, we want to explore O-1 more, but we love our law firm, we have no interest in changing, but we'd be interested to see how this works. I think that would be, good for them to know. So as my last question before I, let you go, this has been a wonderful conversation. I wish we could go on for another half hour at least. I like to ask the guests, what's a piece of advice that you are currently listening to, like that's impacting you today, that maybe someone shared with you or that you've read somewhere that you can share with, with us?
The best piece of advice I've received recently is about resilience. So I think, a lot of startup building, there's a lot of things to solve all the time. And, a company is not built in a day. It's definitely not built in a week. It's not even built in a month or a year. It's built over time. And as an entrepreneur, what you're actually trying to seek is resilience to a system. And so I think one of the things I struggle with is over-optimization of everything. Like you want to optimize for the perfect thing, or like you want excellence across the board. But actually, I think with a focus on optimization, you can end up not building resilience. And so shifting that conversation to, and I'll give you a concrete example. If you have the perfectly optimized schedule and you end up spending one day not doing that schedule, it can really throw you off. Instead of doing that schedule 75% of the time and 25% of the time you're not doing it, but actually you actually continue doing that schedule. So I hope I'm making sense here.
Yeah. So like just for that, so like the 25% allows you to have flexibility without throwing off the entire scheduling process. It's, for example.
And it's a more resilient system.
Right.
So I think that's what's on my mind.
You give it slack. You bring in slack into the system. I mean, if you look at, if you've ever rock climbed, there has to be slack when you're climbing, because if you fall, you need to be able to sort of bounce a little bit and not hurt yourself. Whereas if it's completely tight, you may not be able to do that. So you're adding in a little bit of slack into your system and having it be resilient in the long term, even if it's not quote unquote perfectly optimized at any given point.
Exactly. You put it better than I could. That was
I get it. I got it. Yeah, I love that. That's really great advice. Something I'll think about too and reflect on. Lisa, this was awesome. Like I said, wish we had another half an hour. I hope to get you back, on the show at some point in the future. But thank you so much for being here, for joining, sharing your story. Definitely recommend folks reach out to you. So the website is plymouthstreet.com, right?
Exactly.
You go by Plymouth, but the website's plymouthstreet.com. So for folks interested in the O-1, lawyers, individuals, reach out and connect with you on LinkedIn too. So thank you, Lisa. This is great. And have a great Friday and good luck.
Thank you so much.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you, Lisa. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. What a wonderful episode. Really great conversation. Like I said it a few times, this could have gone on for much longer. There's so much to discuss, but I think overall, hearing the story, of sort of going through the immigration process and then having that entrepreneurial mind to say, this has to be better. I was able to do it better myself. Why can't we turn this into a service for so many other people and a product as well? So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you again to Lex Reception as the main sponsor of the episode. Like I said up top, they are a legal intake reception and client support service. They answer phone calls, messages in real time. They schedule appointments for you. And really, they're 24/7 legal answering specialists so that you don't have to worry about missing a client email or phone call or, potentially missing out on a prospect that may want to work with you. I recently saw Lex Reception share that one of their clients had somebody reach out like on a weekend and say, hey, I need help immediately. This person wasn't able to see the email until Monday, but their Lex Reception team was able to respond right away, get them on the calendar, and effectively not lose that potential client to somebody else who would have replied right away. And you get that one case that's going to pay for your service, however many times over. So check out Lex Reception at lexreception.com or use the link in the show notes. And listeners of the show get $250 off your first month of service with them. So check out Lex Reception. Thank you to them again for sponsoring the show. And thank you all for listening. See you next week for another episode. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Peace out and stay safe.